Well, I think one of the most common questions asked, because we start with what is mastering. I think the next question everybody asks is, how do I get my song to be loud?
Oh my god.
How do I achieve? How do I get it loud enough without it being this bricked out mess or this squashed, over compressed thing that has no dynamic range?
Yeah.
You just get the Oxford inflator.
I was going to say, there's this thing called the volume knob, and
crank that thing.
I'm going to turn the thing up.
Yeah, I think.
You can keep going though.
Okay. Yeah, so like, it depends. I think it depends on the genre, honestly, because like a lot of the time, heavier tracks will need some sort of energy that can only be achieved with some of those elements of like heavy limiting and stuff like that. But when it comes to loudness, you have to ask first if that's a goal or if that's necessary or a part of what you're trying to get. Because if it's not, then usually what you can do without having to like push it to the extremes, getting it louder is frequency response, mid-range. I mean, it's perception. Human ears, we hear most sensitive from 1 to 3K. Fletcher Munson curves, you can look it up.
Yeah, we were talking about this at the pub,
So yeah, like frequency response and making sure that mid-range is really popping. Yeah. And also, you'd be surprised at like imaging. High frequency imaging can make things way louder. Really? Perceived loudness. Yeah, like if you widen, you have to be very careful. But if you widen the high frequencies and you just kind of push them outward a little bit, it takes up more of the spectrum, and your ears are like, "Whoa, this sounds huge!" But it's really like a perceived thing. It's not really like a levels thing as much. It's really perception.
And but it's so much of what loudness is the perception of it. It's not the physical loudness.
And the space that it's taking up.
A great example of that in the real world is actually on like stereo receivers, the loud button. What that does is when we hear lower frequencies, it's harder for us to hear lower frequencies at lower volumes. So the loud button is just a EQ boost that when you turn down the volume, you can pop that in, and all of a sudden it's supposed to balance out the low end and like make sure that you're hearing everything as you would at a normal volume. Yeah. So that's what that loud button is on like stereo receivers from like the 60s and the 70s. And stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think some of them still have it, but now they have like digital. The one that I have has like digital EQ for treble and bass. So
I've got one from the 80s that has like, I don't know if it has the loud button on it, but it's got some wild.
It's called different things sometimes. Yeah. It's like sometimes it's called boost. The one that I see a lot is loud. Yeah.
But you were the first person to tell me this, and then I've seen Chad Blake. Chad Blake? Is that
that's how it's said.
Mixing guy?
Yeah, there's just a T.
Chad Blake.
Chad.
Yeah.
I thought it was T Chad.
That's when so cool.
When I was a kid, I thought it was T Chad. I'd see it like on songs like T Chad Blake. I'm like,
it's like
who's
a
that
Key and
guy?
Peele name.
Who's T Chad? Yeah,
the sport thing.
Yeah.
T Chad Blake.
T Chad Blake.
But he talks about, and you talked about, like if you boost, like if you have a kick drum and you boost, let's say you boost the sub frequency, like you don't necessarily hear that. You feel it more, but because you're feeling it more, you hear the 8K kind of come through a little bit more too, because the whole thing is coming through. That makes sense? Do you know what I mean? You've talked about that.
I know that there is, when you boost a certain frequency, there are also nodes up the octave spectrum from that frequency when you boost it. So, so like if you boost at 50, you could get a node at 500 and 5K, and then maybe you want to cut the 500 because it's muddy, and the 5K just gives you a little bit more. Like with a kick drum, it's like you can lean into that a little bit.
Right. So when you boost, one frequency, it's helping you hear the whole,
or hurting you, and you got to cut.
Yeah, that's when you brought it up though. Boosting a certain frequency on something, and you're like, well, if you boost here, you should probably cut here. For that reason.
Well, so there's I think what you're talking about too, a lot of that comes from, that's what saturation helps with, is like harmonic structure and more presence that way, because that inherently just creates more presence and more tonality up the spectrum as you go.
Right.
But with what you're talking about, I think what you're mentioning is what I said about mirroring with frequencies,
That might be
where
right.
it's like
Yeah.
it's the concept where like if you boost the mid range, it also might sound like you're scooping the low mids because they're mirrors of each other.
Right.
So if you boost the low mids, all of a sudden the high mids or the mids go down. So it's just a way to think about different ways of approaching the same problem. Where it's if there's too many low mids, do I preserve that and just boost the mid range to compensate,
Right.
or do I actually lower the low mids and then now you have this? So that's where a lot of like I think Bob Katz talks about it in his book, in his mastering book.
Bob Cass.
Yeah, that's the Bible.
Is it?
That's the mastering Bible for sure.
You're gonna have to send me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll send you the
What's
link.
his book called?
I legitimately think it's just called Mastering Audio, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked
Sounds
at
like
it.
a good place
Yeah.
to start.
Yeah.
You know?
Look it up for me if you can. 'Cause I'm
Bob
curious.
Katz.
Just look up Bob Katz's mastering book. I can't remember the exact title. It's been a few years since I've opened it, but I return to it every so often.
I might have to pick that up.
Yeah. But it's cool because he goes into detail about the most recent edition. Oh, you got it?
No.
Oh.
There's a TV show. There's a TV show called Bob, and then there's a cast to that TV show.
I look up. It's a Katz.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, what's cool about that book is more editions have come out as audio has progressed. So in the one that I have was kind of around the time when LUFs were becoming huge and everyone was like,
Yeah.
oh, we gotta. So he
Everyone's
talks
paying
about it.
attention to LUFs, yeah.
And he talks about how to approach LUFs with streaming and a bunch of other things that were updated, which is
Yeah.
fascinating and useful.
And very
Yeah.
like kind of the standard right now is like, I mean, you're basically just mastering for Spotify and Apple Music.
Yep.
You know, 90% of what is being heard is going to be from those two.
Yeah.
And you want to play to their
Right.
settings, which actually brings me into another interesting question. Maybe maybe you know about this, or maybe you're just in the same boat where like everybody has their own they've staked out their position on it, which is the -14 LUFs for Spotify or whatever. You know, like I've heard some people say, I don't care. I'm going to make my master sound good, and then I'm going to just throw it at Spotify and they can do what they want to do with it. Other people are very purist about it, where they're like, it has to fall under this. You don't want your master to get messed with in the compression ratio of the streaming service or whatever. Where do you fall on that kind of debate?
I still fall into the realm of if it makes the song sound better, I'm just gonna do it. When it comes to like limiting and stuff, I've had a lot of discussions with some colleagues about this.
Yeah.
And we all kind of are just like, yeah, I mean, we're gonna limit and we're gonna put it in because Spotify. I mean, it's always changing. But the way that Spotify in particular,
they're not transparent about it either.
yeah, they're not, and it's so
Which isn't that
difficult.
Bizarre that they're not showing that. Yeah.
You think they'd want to be like they would have a vested interest in being more transparent.
It literally
Yeah.
helps everybody.
I looked up what the current process is a few months ago, and it probably has even changed since then.
Yeah.
But I will say, my philosophy about it is, usually, what they're going to do is they're going to turn it down, which is just gain.
Yeah.
And I would rather have them turn it down with gain than up with whatever limiting they used to put on there to compensate.
That's a good point.
So I would much rather whatever I do be maintained, and then they can just lower the gain, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like I said, it could have changed since then how they approach it. I think now that I'm recalling, there was something about how they approach I think they're measuring something about the difference in peak to LUFs or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly what it was. But anyway, yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna do what I think the song needs.
Yeah.
So
I
that's kind of where I
jive
stand.
more with that view of things. I feel like trying to, well, for one, like from mastering songs, there's some songs you just cannot make fit into that, because there's too much dynamic range in the song or the energy of the song. You just, you'd have to like deconstruct the mix almost to even get it into those parameters.
Right.